The lawyer's office smelled like burnt coffee and lemon polish, and my mother was smiling the way she smiled at church. My parents had called me down like it was somebody's birthday. My sister sat between them in a coat that still had the fold lines from the store. I thought we were there to read my grandfather's will. We were not. I sat down in a hard little chair with my hands in my lap, and I watched my mother arrange her face, and some animal part of me went quiet and alert the way you do when the room is wrong before you know why. What none of them understood, sitting there in that carpeted quiet, was that 3 years later I would be the only reason any of it was still standing. Where the quiet ones turn out to be the people holding everything together. If a family ever measured you by what you owned instead of what you carried, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Thea Ansel. I was 31 that spring, and I still believed love in my family was a thing you earned by showing up. Grandpa Elias had been in the ground 3 weeks. I drove down from Burlington expecting his will, expecting talk about the farmhouse, expecting to sit in the back and stay quiet like always. Instead, the lawyer slid a folder across the table with my parents' names on the tab, not my grandfather's. A living trust. Their trust. Something they could have dropped in the mail with a stamp. So why gather the whole family into one room, dress my sister in a new coat, buy a fresh pot of coffee, and sit me down to hear it read out loud? My mother folded her hands like a woman at the front pew. My father studied the window blinds as though they owed him money, and the first cold thread of understanding pulled tight across my chest before a single page had turned. The lawyer read it the way you read a weather report, flat and careful. The Hollow Creek property, the house on the lake, the land my great-grandparents cleared by hand, the accounts, all of it, roughly $4 million, held in trust for my sister Brooke. Then came a second line, and he did not slow down for it. To my daughter Thea, having given careful thought to the matter, I leave nothing. I heard the words twice before they landed anywhere. Brooke's face went pink and blotchy. She reached for my hand under the table and I let her take it, because her fingers were shaking and mine, strangely, were not. My mother watched me the entire time, waiting for the collapse. When it didn't come, she leaned back in her chair, satisfied, and delivered the line she had clearly been saving for years. You were always our biggest disappointment. The coffee maker hissed in the corner. Not one person at that table said a word against her. I asked quietly if I could see the document. The lawyer hesitated, glanced at my mother, then turned the pages so I could read the clause at the bottom myself. It was a no-contest provision. If I challenged any part of the trust, I forfeited anything I might ever otherwise be given, down to the last dollar. Then I read the date on the signature page, and that was the part that took the floor out from under me. 18 months earlier. This was not grief talking. This was not a decision made in one hard week beside a deathbed. My parents had sat with a lawyer a year and a half ago, chosen every word, and built a door with the lock on my side of it. Then they had waited until my grandfather was buried, and I was already down for the funeral to swing it shut. With an audience. Over coffee. My mother's smile had not slipped once. She had planned even the timing of it. Brooke found her voice before I found mine. Mom, maybe we could... And then nothing. The sentence dying in the air, because my mother turned and looked at her, and my sister was still a woman who could be looked into silence. My father kept his eyes on the blinds. He was 66 years old and had spent 40 of them letting my mother decide what our family believed, so that he would never have to be the one who chose. I understood the whole room in a single breath. Not one person at that table was going to say my name kindly. Not the lawyer who worked for them. Not Brooke, who loved me and feared her mother more than she loved me. Not my father, who could have ended it with a single word and instead counted the slats in the window. There was nothing left in that room for me, so I stood up. I didn't beg. I didn't threaten. I had learned a long time ago that begging in that house was just handing someone a stick to hit you with. I looked at the folder, and at the pen the lawyer had laid out in case there was anything for me to acknowledge, and there was nothing. Okay, I said. Then there's nothing here for me to sign. My mother's chin lifted, like I had confirmed something she'd always known. When I was 12, she'd started calling me the difficult one. At dinners, in front of relatives, the way you'd name a dog you were tired of. I picked up my keys off the table. Brooke said my name, once, soft as a question, and I did not turn around, because if I turned around, I would have to watch her not follow me out. I walked through the burnt coffee air and into the parking lot, and the door clicked shut behind me like a period at the end of a sentence someone else had written. I got into my car and I did not drive. My hands were shaking now. Finally, now that no one was left to see them. That is the part people always misread when they hear this story later. They think I walked out cold. I was not cold. I was 31 years old and I had just been told, in a room my own family had paid for, that everything I had ever done added up to nothing worth leaving me. And still, sitting there gripping the wheel in an empty lot, one thought rose up over all the others, and it shames me a little to say it out loud even now. Someday, I told myself, I'll build something so big and so undeniable that they will have to see they were wrong about me. That was the poison already in me. Not the money, the wanting. The wanting to be seen by the exact people who had just proven, on paper, that they never would. I drove the 50 minutes back to Burlington and let myself into my one-bedroom apartment, and it was small, and it was mine, and no one there had ever handed me a ruler. I worked as a land consultant in those days, just getting started, helping small farms untangle conservation deals and tax burdens that most people never even hear the names of. When a family couldn't keep their acreage, I was the one who found the door in the wall nobody else had noticed. I was good at it. I was also invisible at it. The person who did the quiet math in the back, while someone else stepped forward to shake the hand and get thanked. That was the shape of me. The shape I'd been sanded into by 31 years of it. I took on more clients than I could carry, worked past midnight, said yes to everything anyone asked, because when my hands were full, I didn't have to sit still with the empty part of me. That night, I opened 3 new files just so I wouldn't have to feel the day. A dairy family 2 counties over was saving their whole spread with a conservation easement, and I processed it clean and filed it away without a second thought. I had no idea I was looking straight at the road out of my own life. Not yet. Here is the thing my mother never once said out loud in that office. For the last 2 years of my grandfather's life, when his hands stopped working and his mind came and went like a radio between stations, I was the one who drove down every single weekend. I balanced the Hollow Creek books after the hired man quit and left the ledgers a wreck. I chased down the lapsed insurance and the unpaid feed bill nobody else had opened. I sat up with him through the nights he thought it was 1962 and his wife was still alive in the next room, and I learned to just say, yes, she's resting. Go back to sleep. Because correcting him only made him grieve her again. Brooke was 3 states away building a career, and no one blamed her for it. And honestly, neither did I. But when the accounting of us was finally done, when the exact worth of each daughter was set down on legal paper, the one who had carried him to the very end was named the disappointment, and the one who had sent flowers on the holidays got the farm. Not a single person in that room thought it was strange. That was the family I was raised inside. My grandfather used to say a thing when we walked the back fields together. Me maybe 9 years old, him with one hand resting on the top rail of the fence. Land remembers who kept it, he'd say. Not who owned it, who kept it. I didn't know what he meant back then. I thought it was just old man talk, the kind you nod at. After the funeral, his neighbor pressed a cardboard box of his things into my arms and told me Elias had set it aside with my name written on the side of it before he got bad. Papers, mostly, from the feel of it. I carried it up to my apartment in Burlington and I put it in the back of my closet, and I did not open it. I couldn't. Some grief you have to earn your way back to before you can look at it straight. I told myself I'd open it when I was stronger. What sat inside that box would have changed the whole shape of the next 3 years, if I had only looked. I didn't. And the box waited for me in the dark, patient as he'd always been. So I made a decision, and for once, it was mine to make. No more driving down. No more phone calls that ended with me apologizing for how a conversation had made my mother feel. I closed the door on Hollow Creek and I turned the lock myself. From my side, for the first time in my life. 3 years went by like that. One quiet season stacked on the next. I built the business slowly, one saved farm at a time, my name spreading soft and low through a small world of people who worked dirt for a living and remembered who helped them keep it. I stopped waiting for my parents to see me, or I told myself I had, which turns out to be a very different thing, and I would not learn the difference for a long time. For 3 years, the phone never once rang from home, and then, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, it did. By then, I was the person other people called when a family farm was about to go under. 34 years old, a real office of my own now with my name on a modest sign. 2 people on my payroll, a reputation built entirely out of things nobody had ever put my name on. I had become, without quite meaning to, the exact woman I used to need standing across a kitchen table from me at 9 years old. The irony wasn't lost on me. I chewed on it some nights. I helped strangers keep the ground their grandparents cleared, and I did it well, and I went home to a quiet apartment and no family at all. What I still could not do, after 3 whole years, was drive past the Hollow Creek turnoff without my stomach cinching up tight, so I routed around it. Always. An extra 20 minutes added to any trip just to avoid the sight of one particular mailbox. Some burns you don't touch even years after the skin has closed over. I honestly believed I had made my peace with all of it by putting a whole county between us. But peace built on distance is just avoidance wearing a nicer coat, and I did not know that yet. I was about to be taught it, the hard way, the only way I ever seemed to learn anything worth keeping. The call was routine, or it started that way. A land co-op wanted me to consult on some distressed parcels headed for auction in the spring, farms where the family had run out of road. The woman read down her list, one property after another, and I took notes in my careful shorthand, already sorting which ones had a chance. Then she said a name I had spent 3 years refusing to let cross my own lips. There's the Voss place, out at Hollow Creek. That one's coming up fast, I hear. Family can't hold it. My pen stopped on the page. I asked her carefully, keeping my voice flat, to repeat that last one. She did. The Voss place. My family's place. The $4 million inheritance my mother had smiled about across a table. The thing I was too much of a disappointment to be trusted with was sitting on a list of farms about to be sold out from under people who couldn't keep them. For a long second, I couldn't feel the phone against my ear at all. I thanked her, said I'd look at the list, and hung up before my voice could give me away. I did what I always do when I'm frightened. I reached for paperwork. I pulled the public records that same afternoon, the exact same way I would for any client who walked through my door, because facts on a page hold still and let you look at them without flinching. What I found was worse than the rumor. The trust held land and almost no cash. My sister had taken a mortgage against the property to cover the estate taxes and the upkeep, and then a second mortgage stacked on top of the first, and now the bank had started the clock that only runs one direction. $4 million on paper. Land rich and cash poor. The oldest trap in all of farm country. The one I spent my whole working life pulling people out of. And my parents had handed it to the one daughter who had never once balanced a checkbook in her life, and they had called it a gift. It was not a gift. It was a slow-motion foreclosure with a ribbon tied around it. And some ugly, honest part of me looked at all of it laid out in black and white and thought, plainly and without shame, good. If you've ever watched a family hand everything to the wrong person and call it fair, you already know exactly how this feels. Stay with me. It gets worse before it turns. Subscribe so you don't miss where it turns. I remembered the day they announced it. Before the lawyer, before any of the paperwork, at a church supper in the basement with the folding tables and the coffee urn. My mother, glowing under those fluorescent lights, telling half the town that Brooke was the one who would make Hollow Creek bloom again. The neighbors nodding along over their casseroles, murmuring how wonderful. My father beside her, proud in his silence, the way he was proud of everything, quietly and from just behind her shoulder. It was a performance, and the whole town was the audience, And my sister had stood up there and believed every single word of it, because who wouldn't want to be the one the story is about? Now that same praise had become a rope around her neck. She couldn't sell without the entire county learning she'd lost the thing our mother had sworn from the pulpit she would save. She couldn't ask for help without confessing that the golden gift had rotted in her hands inside 3 short years. My mother had wrapped my sister in a story she could never possibly live up to, and called it love, and never once weighed what it would cost the girl to carry it. I ran into someone from home that same week, a woman named Deb, who'd grown up 2 farms over from us. At a co-op meeting neither of us had expected the other to attend. She filled in the rest without my having to ask, the way small towns always do, generous with everyone's business but their own. Brooke was drowning and far too ashamed to say so to a living soul. My father had been sick over the winter. Nothing fatal, a heart scare that put him in the hospital for a week and sent him home a smaller and grayer man than the one who'd gone in. My mother was holding the whole thing together with pearls and posture and an iron refusal to let the town see a single crack in the paint. "Shame about you girls," Deb said, watching my face. However, that all shook out. I didn't correct her. I stood there with my coffee going cold in my hand and felt something I did not want to feel, which was the old, hooked pull of a family that had told me plainly to my face that I was not one of them. My father, sick and shrinking. I hated exactly how much it moved me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and argued with myself like 2 entirely different women. The first one said, "Let it burn." They chose this. They looked me dead in the eye across a table and chose this. And now the choosing is eating them alive. And that isn't cruelty on my part. That's just arithmetic finally coming due. The second woman was quieter, and I trusted her far less, because she wanted something. She wanted to ride in and save it and stand in that lawyer's office while my parents finally understood what they had thrown away. And underneath both of them, so far down I could barely make it out, a small true voice asked me a question I could not yet answer. "If you save it so they'll be sorry, whose approval are you still down on your knees begging for?" I turned off the light without deciding anything at all. But before I did, I got the box down from the back of the closet and set it on the kitchen table, where I'd have to look at it in the morning. The box smelled like him, like pipe smoke and old paper and the inside of a barn coat, and for a long minute I just knelt there on my kitchen floor with the lid in my hands and let that be true, and let it hurt. Then I made myself go through it, piece by piece, the way I go through a client's shoebox of records. Deeds going all the way back to my great-grandfather, the ink gone brown at the folds. A hand-drawn map of the back fields, the wet corners marked with a careful X, the good hay ground shaded in soft pencil. Tax notices from decades I wasn't alive for, kept for no reason on earth, except that he kept everything that ever touched that land. And underneath all of it, at the very bottom, in a plain white envelope with my name written across the front in his shaky late handwriting, a letter. He'd written it maybe a year before he died, back when his mind was still mostly his own, and he knew the difference between the years. My hands were steadier holding that envelope than they had been at the fence rail when I was 9, so I sat there on the floor of a rented room, 50 miles from the land he loved, and I read what my grandfather had needed me to know before he ran out of time to say it. He knew. That was the very first thing the letter told me, in the very first line, no preamble. He knew my parents were going to give Hollow Creek to Brooke, and he knew exactly why, and he believed with his whole stubborn heart that they were wrong, and he was too old and too tired and too near the end to fight it head on the way he might have at 50. So he did the only thing he had left in him to do. He didn't leave me money. He knew money would only make me an heir. One more name in the fight over the deed. He left me knowing instead. He wrote out, in that careful hand, the name of a land trust he'd spoken with years back, and a note that the whole acreage would qualify for a conservation easement, one that could wipe out the tax burden entirely and pay real money into the family to keep the land whole and unsold, forever, past the reach of any bank. Things that only a person in my exact profession would ever understand how to actually use. And at the bottom, the hand failing now, he had written one line I have never once gotten out of my head. "You'll know what to do, girl, because you're the only one who ever loved the dirt, not the deed." I read that line 4 times before I could set the letter down on the table. Love the dirt, not the deed. He had seen the entire family in a single sentence, the whole 70 years of us. They had spent their lives fighting over the paper, the title, the $4 million number printed at the top of a page, and not one of them had ever once knelt down and put a bare hand into that soil for its own sake, except him and me. And he had left me the only thing on earth that could actually save it, not so that I could own it, not to make me an heir after all, but because I was the one single person who would know how to use it, which meant the choice was mine now, wholly and completely mine, in a way that nothing in that lawyer's office had ever been mine. I could pick up the phone in the morning and use it, or I could close the lid of this box, slide it back into the dark of the closet where it had waited 3 years, and let the land my grandfather loved get auctioned off to strangers in the spring. Either way, I understood. Sitting alone in that kitchen, I was going to have to go back to Hollow Creek. And I had sworn I never would. So I went back. I drove the 50 minutes I had spent 3 years carefully avoiding, and I turned down the Hollow Creek Road, and my hands remembered every curve of it before my eyes did, easing off the gas at the dip where the frost always heaved the blacktop in March. I did not pull into the drive. I stopped the car at the far fence line, where you can see the whole house across the low field, and I made myself sit there behind the wheel and look. The land was rough. Fences down in the near pasture, the field gone to weed and thistle, the barn roof patched over with a blue tarp faded gray by 2 winters of sun. My grandfather would have wept to see it. And out in the side yard, in the long gold light of late afternoon, a little girl I had never once met was chasing a barn cat through the tall grass, shrieking with the pure delight of it. 4 years old, maybe, my sister's daughter, my niece. A child who had done absolutely nothing to anyone, standing right in the middle of a war she was far too small to even see the edges of. And then I saw the door. The front door of the house my mother had told me, to my face, that I would never deserve. The house 3 generations of us had been born inside, and taped to the middle of it, lifting and settling a little in the wind, was a bank notice. I knew that particular paper by heart from 20 years of standing in other people's kitchens holding one just like it while somebody cried at the sink. I did not need to cross the field and read a word of it to know what it said. Foreclosure timeline. Final notice. The last cold administrative step before a family loses the ground out from under its own feet. There was a bank notice taped to the door of the house my mother said I'd never deserve, and a 4-year-old playing in the yard beneath it, and my grandfather's letter warm in my coat pocket against my ribs. I sat at that fence for a long, long time until the gold light went to blue and the little girl was called inside by a voice I recognized and flinched from. When I finally turned the car around and drove away, the image came with me, and it has never once fully left me since. I didn't decide at the fence. I decided somewhere on the drive home, around the county line, and the shape the decision took surprised even me. I was going to save it, but not the way the poisoned younger woman in me had wanted for 3 years, not riding in on a white horse so they'd all weep and beg and finally see. If I was going to do this thing, I was going to do it the exact way I had done everything my entire life, the very thing that had gotten me named the disappointment in the first place. Quietly, invisibly, without my name anywhere on any page of it. They had spent 30 years teaching me that work nobody sees is work that doesn't count, that a daughter who carries and never claims is worth nothing on the family ledger. Fine. I would take them at their word. I would save their land with work no one would ever see, and I would do it because a 4-year-old was playing under a foreclosure notice, and I would take exactly nothing in return, not a dollar, and not a thank you. That was the plan I made at the county line in the dark. I almost managed to keep it. I called a lawyer I trusted the next morning, Rachel Okafor, who had started out as a paralegal and clawed her way up to her own small practice, and who had no patience whatsoever for anybody's family drama, including, thank God, mine. I laid the whole thing out for her over the phone, then again over coffee when she made me come in and say it to her face. The easement, the land trust, the structure of it. A conservation buyer purchases the development rights to the property. The money that changes hands pays down both mortgages and the back taxes. And the land itself gets locked as working farmland forever, made legally worthless to any developer who might come sniffing around a lake view. The family keeps the house they live in, and nobody has to know who set the whole thing in motion because it comes to them through the trust, dressed up as a program, an offer, a lucky break out of a clear sky. Rachel listened to all of it, quiet, turning her pen over in her fingers, and then she set it down and asked me the only question that actually mattered. You sure you can do this and not need them to know it was you? I told her yes. I even believed it when I said it, sitting there in her office. That was the one single part of the plan I hadn't tested yet. There was one wall I could not go around, no matter how many ways I turned it in my head. Brooke owned the land now. Nothing moved an inch without the landowner's signature on it, which meant I had to get a document into my sister's hands, get her to read it and sign it, and do the whole thing without her ever once knowing that her disgraced older sister was on the far end of the line. So I ran it through the land trust as precisely what it appeared to be on paper, a legitimate conservation program quietly reaching out to a struggling family farm the way they actually do, with no name on it anywhere but hers and the trust's. Rachel sent it cold and official, from a return address that meant absolutely nothing to a single soul in my family. Then there was nothing left to do but wait, and I am terrible at waiting. I waited 3 days to see whether a drowning woman too proud to ask anyone for help would still reach out and grab a rope, when a stranger was the one holding the other end of it. She grabbed it. Of course she grabbed it. She had a mortgage clock ticking down in her ears, and a little girl asleep down the hall, and a mother who would sooner lose the whole farm than ever be told out loud that she had chosen the wrong daughter. Brooke signed the conservation agreement without ever once knowing whose knowledge had built the thing, my grandfather's knowledge, handed down through a letter at the bottom of a box to the one grandchild who loved the dirt more than the deed. The signed papers came back to the trust. The land trust moved its money into place. The foreclosure clock stopped. Just like that. The clean, quiet way it stops when you finally understand the machine well enough to reach in and pull the one right lever. My grandfather had been dead 3 years and his hand was still resting on that fence rail, still steering. For the first time in 3 years, I was holding my family's entire future in my 2 hands, and not one of them knew my name was anywhere on it. I know exactly what you're thinking. Why help them at all? Hold that thought. What I did next, I did not do for them. And I need you to understand that before we get to the room. Comment if you'd have walked away. Subscribe for the rest. For a few weeks it worked, and honestly, the quiet of it unsettled me far more than the crisis ever had. The mortgages restructured on schedule. The tax burden dissolved cleanly into the easement, the way it's supposed to on paper, and so rarely does in real life. Hollow Creek was safe, held whole, protected forever, and I had done it, and no one on earth knew, and that was supposed to feel like enough to close the book. It didn't. I'd sit alone in my office late at night with the lights off and catch myself circling the same worn question like a dog circling a spot before it lies down. Why had I really done it? For the land, I told myself firmly. For the 4-year-old under the notice. Both true, both real, both things I'd say again. But there was a third thing down there in the dark underneath the first 2, and I did not like the look of it at all. And every single time I got close enough to make out its shape, it turned around slow and looked back at me wearing my mother's exact face. Here is the honest part. The part I'm not proud of and told no one for a long time. Some piece of me was waiting. Not for a thank you exactly. Nothing so simple. I was waiting for the moment it all came out. The moment they finally learned who had reached in and saved them, so that I could stand there in some room and watch the understanding cross my mother's face like weather rolling in over a bare field. I had saved the land anonymously and told myself the whole time that it was selfless, saintly even, and all the while, underneath the story, I was still sitting in that lawyer's chair at 31, still waiting to be seen. The want hadn't died when I closed the box that night. It had only gotten quieter and better dressed and much harder to catch in the act. So I made myself a promise, a real one this time, and I built it deliberately as a test I could either pass or fail. I would keep my name off it forever. No reveal, no reckoning, no weather on anybody's face. If I could not do that one single thing, then I hadn't actually saved anything at all, least of all myself. The promise held for about 10 days. Brooke, it turned out, was not the kind of woman who took a miracle without asking hard questions about where it had come from. She called the land trust to thank them, warmly, at length, the way you do when a stranger reaches into your worst night and pulls you bodily out of it. And then she started asking who had funded it, who had set it up, whether there was somebody, anybody, a person with a name and an address she could write a proper letter to. The trust deflected her, gently, exactly the way I had instructed them to. But she kept circling back, week after week, and every circle came a little closer to the center, and I sat in my office listening to Rachel relay each new call and felt the walls of my own careful plan begin to press slowly inward on me. I had built a rescue with no door in it for gratitude, because gratitude was the one single thing on earth that could undo me. And my sister, God love her stubborn heart, would not stop knocking on it. I should tell you about Brooke, because it's easy to make her the fool in this story, and she was never that. When we were girls, she used to sneak into my room after our mother's bad nights. The nights the whole house went cold and careful, and she'd climb into my bed shaking, and I'd tell her stories in the dark until she finally stopped. Made-up stories, most of them, about a farm where the animals talked, and nobody ever got sent to bed hungry for talking back. She was not born believing she deserved more than I did. She was taught it, patiently, over years, the very same way I was taught that I deserved less, by the same woman, at the same kitchen table, with the same ruler laid across the both of us. My mother measured her daughters her entire life, every single day, and simply set us on opposite ends of the same yardstick. Brooke happened to land on the side that got praised, and praise is its own kind of cage. I understand that now in a way I couldn't back then. She'd been handed a whole farm as living proof that she was the good one, and the weight of it was quietly killing her, and she still didn't understand that it had never once been hers to fail at in the first place. Then, the plan turned on me, the way plans always do at the exact worst possible moment. The final easement filing required an original signature from the qualified consultant of record, with a full legal name, entered into the county register where any person who cared to look could pull it in an afternoon. Mine. There was no dressing that one up. No trust to hide behind, no cold anonymous address from nowhere, no clever structure. If I signed it, then Thea Ansel went into a public document tied directly and permanently to the Hollow Creek Conservation, and the entire invisible thing I had spent months building could be undone by anyone in the county who thought to go looking for a name. I sat with that single page in front of me on my desk for a long time, past midnight, the office dark and quiet around me and the streetlight buzzing outside. Sign it, and the land was saved. But my name stood in the open where I had sworn on my grandfather's letter it never would. Don't sign it, and I'd have stayed perfectly, uselessly hidden and watched every last bit of it fall down anyway come spring. There is no version of loving something that stays clean to the end. I signed it. Of course I signed it. I would love to tell you it was a hard, noble, chin-up sort of choice, the kind you'd want a daughter of yours to make. But the truth is much simpler than that, and it cost me something real to learn it about myself. When it finally came all the way down to keeping the land whole or keeping myself safely hidden, the land won, easily, without a real contest. And that told me plainly which of the two I had actually been serving the whole time. My grandfather did not leave me that letter so I could protect my own pride from my own family. He left it so the dirt would outlast every last one of us and all our small opinions of each other. So I put my full legal name on the consultant line, Thea Ansel, in blue ink, and I filed it with the county, and I let it go into the public record where it would sit forever. And I told myself, reasonably, that no one in my family has ever in their lives read a county conservation register, which was perfectly true. But my sister was about to walk into a bank and be handed a thick stack of paper she had never once asked to read. It happened during the refinance closing, of all the plain, ordinary places for a life to turn over. The bank, tying up the very last loose ends of the whole restructure, slid the entire easement package across the table for Brooke to initial and sign off on, page after page after page of it, the way banks do, and somewhere in the dense gray middle of that stack, on the consultant line, in plain black type, sat my name, Thea Ansel. She told me later that she read it 3 separate times before it meant anything at all to her, that she actually lifted her head and looked around the closing room like there might be some other Thea Ansel loose somewhere in the whole state of Vermont. And then, all at once, she understood. The stranger who had reached into her worst night and quietly saved her whole world was no stranger. It was the disappointment. It was the sister who had stood up from a lawyer's table 3 years before and walked out and never once come back, holding the entire thing upright the whole time from 50 miles away in the dark, asking for nothing. She called me that same night. I very nearly didn't answer it. I watched her name sit and glow on the phone through 4 rings. When I finally did, there was no hello on her end, no lead-in, nothing. Just her voice, wrecked and small and about 8 years old again. "Was this you?" she said. "All of it? The trust, the program, Was this you, Thea?" I could have lied. I am very good at deflecting. I had just built an entire months-long rescue out of the single skill. But she was my sister, and she had cried in my bed when we were children, afraid of our own house. And I was tired, so bone-tired, of not being seen even in the very moments when I was the one doing the hiding. "Yes," I said, "just that." And I stood there in my kitchen and listened to 3 years of story quietly rearrange itself in the long silence on her end of the line, the good sister and the bad one, the gift and the disappointment, the whole careful architecture of us turning over at once in the dark. The land was safe, but the secret was gone now, out of my hands, and secrets in my family never once in my life stayed inside a single room. Brooke was a whole mess of things at once that night, and I let her be every one of them without rushing her through any of it. Grateful, first, almost incoherently grateful, and then ashamed of how grateful she was, and then afraid, because she already knew something I still hadn't let myself sit down with. She asked me the question my entire family asks about everything on this earth. "What do you want for doing this? What do you want back from me, Thea?" And I understood, hearing her ask it in that small, careful voice, that she genuinely did not know there was any other kind of answer a person could give. In our house, every single thing had a price and a ledger and a reckoning waiting quietly at the end of it. "Nothing," I told her. "That was the whole point of it." The line went quiet for a long moment. She didn't understand it. Couldn't have. She'd been raised on the exact same ruler I had, and nobody had ever handed her a different one. Then she said the thing I had been carefully not thinking about for days. "Mom is going to find out. You know she will. And Thea, when she does, she is not going to say thank you. You know that too." My mother found out inside the week, the way she found out everything. I never did learn exactly how it reached her, whether Brooke let it slip in a weak, grateful moment, or whether the bank talk simply drifted her direction, the way everything eventually drifts to a woman who has spent her whole life listening at the edges of a small town. It doesn't matter which. What matters is her reaction, because it told me plainly that nothing at all had changed, and at the very same time that everything had. She was not grateful. Gratitude would have required her to admit, even silently, even just to herself in a dark room, that she had been saved by the very daughter she'd thrown away over coffee, and that arithmetic simply did not compute anywhere inside her. So instead, she got busy. If the disappointment had somehow saved Hollow Creek, then the story would have to be quietly rewritten so that it wasn't a rescue at all, so that it became the family, together, weathering one more hard season the way strong families always do. She reached for the ruler one final time to measure me back down to a size she could still carry comfortably in one hand, and she started making phone calls of her own. So Rachel made a call of her own, and that call is the one that changed everything that came after. To finalize the easement and the restructured trust cleanly, to put the whole thing permanently beyond any one person's power to quietly unwind it later in a back room, my lawyer picked up the phone and called my parents' lawyer on the record, formally, and asked all of us to sit down together at one table and sign the last of it. The moment she set the phone back down in its cradle, it was done, and it could not be undone. 3 years of total silence between me and that house ended with one phone call between two lawyers who had never met. Whatever was going to happen inside that room, there was no longer any version of my life waiting on the other side of it where I quietly went back to being the daughter no one bothered to mention at dinner. I had stepped clean over a line I could not step back across. My name was on the land now, in the record, in my mother's ear, in the whole town's coming gossip. The quiet was over for good. They wanted me at a table again. Only this time, for the first time in my life, I was the one who had called the meeting. It was the same kind of room. It might even have been the very same room. I honestly could not tell you, because they all smell exactly alike. Burnt coffee and lemon polish. The precise smell that had been waiting there for me the last time my whole family gathered to inform me what I was worth. My mother sat in her pearls, back straight as a fence post. My father sat smaller than I remembered him being, the winter's heart scare written plainly across his gray face and his spotted hands where they rested on the table. Brooke was not sitting between them this time, I noticed the second I walked in, but off to one side, her chair pulled noticeably closer to my end of the table than to theirs. 2 lawyers, one on each flank, folders squared in front of them. And me, walking in on my own 2 feet, 34 years old now, holding absolutely nothing in my hands, because for the first time in my whole life, I did not need to be holding anything at all. I lowered myself into the same kind of hard little chair I had stood up out of 3 years before. Nobody smiled at me like it was church. This time the room had no idea at all what it was. Rachel laid it out for them the exact same way the other lawyer had once laid out my erasure, plainly, flatly, like a weather report on a slow gray day. The Hollow Creek land was saved, held now in a permanent conservation easement, taxes fully resolved, both mortgages restructured and current, the ground itself locked as working farmland forever, safe from the auction block for good and for all. She let that settle. And then she said that the person who had quietly built the entire thing, over months, through the trust, page by patient page, was the daughter sitting at the far end of the table. She said my name into that room the exact way you'd state a plain and ordinary fact about the weather. Thea Ansel. I watched it travel slowly across their 3 faces like a shadow crossing a field. Brooke already knew and only lowered her eyes to her hands. My mother's jaw set hard, a small muscle jumping high in her cheek. And my father, slow and sick and 69 years old now, began at last to understand what he was actually hearing, and I sat there in my hard chair and watched the understanding of it quietly take him apart where he sat. He said it quietly the first time, almost to himself, like a man carefully testing a word in a language he didn't speak. That's impossible. Rachel kept right on going, laying out the last of the structure, and he said it again, louder, not to argue with her, but because his mind simply could not fit the shape of the thing through the door. That's impossible. The disappointment, the one they had removed from the will with a clause and a smile, and a full 18 months of planning ahead of time. The one my mother had named at that very kind of table 3 years earlier, our biggest disappointment, the words she had so clearly been saving up for years like coins in a jar. And now that same daughter was the only living reason the $4 million gift they had handed the other one still existed on this earth at all. My father looked at me across that table, and his eyes were wet and old, and he said it one final time, broken all the way through now, right down to the bare floor of himself. That's impossible. It was the closest he had come, in 34 years of my life, to saying my name like it meant something to him. My mother recovered first. She always did. It was the great and terrible talent of her whole life. She folded her hands on the table in front of her, the church smile ghosting back onto her face by slow degrees, and she pivoted the way that only she in all the world knew how to pivot. She said that perhaps, given everything, given how the whole family had pulled together through such a very hard time, it was finally time to make things right between us, to restore me to the trust, to put all of our names on Hollow Creek together, side by side, as a family, the way, she said, it always should have been from the very start. She offered it generously, warmly, leaning slightly forward across the table, like a gift she was carefully pressing into my open hands. And there it was, laid out plain in the middle of the table. The exact thing the poisoned younger woman gripping the wheel in that empty parking lot 3 years ago had wanted more than she'd wanted air. To be restored. To be seen. To be told, out loud and in front of witnesses and lawyers, that I belonged and always had. My mother was holding it out to me across the table, and all I had to do in the whole wide world was reach out my hand and take it. And I finally saw it, the entire shape of my life, all at once, clear as cold well water for the first time ever. If I reached across that table and took the restoration, took my name back onto the deed, took the seat at the family they were suddenly so very willing to offer me, I would be handing my mother the ruler all over again with my own 2 hands. She would measure me generously this time, yes, mark me down at last as belonging, as good, as restored, a credit to the family after all. But it would still be her hand on the ruler, always, and my worth would still be sitting there in her grip, hers to raise or to lower again whenever the mood or the season took her. Praise from that hand was the very same cage as blame from it. I had simply never once been offered the praise before, so in all my life I had never seen the bars for what they were. I understood then, sitting in that hard chair with everyone watching, that I had never actually wanted their money or their land or their farm. I had wanted, my whole life, to stop needing their eyes on me, and the only way left in the world to stop needing them was to refuse, right here, right now, in front of all of them, the one thing that would prove I still did. So I said no, quietly, the way I say everything that has ever mattered. I told them I did not want to be restored to the trust, did not want my name back on the deed, did not want a seat at a table they were offering me only now that I had finally, at long last, become too expensive to keep on ignoring. Then I slid Rachel's last document into the center of the table, the one the 2 of us had drawn up carefully in advance for exactly this moment, and I signed it there in front of all of them. It moved the entire rescue, the whole structure I had built with my grandfather's steady hand, guiding mine from the grave into a separate conservation trust held for Nora, my niece, the 4-year-old who had been playing in the tall grass under the foreclosure notice, to keep the land whole for her generation, unsellable forever, with no benefactor's name attached to it anywhere on any page for anyone to ever find. I gave up the money. I gave up the restoration. I gave up the single thing I had wanted my entire life, at the exact moment they finally, fully understood what I was. And then I picked up my keys off the table. "Keep the recognition," I said, standing. "I never needed it. I just needed to know I could walk out of a room like this one without it." My mother's composure finally cracked, and it cracked the exact way I should have known all along that it would. Not into shame, never into shame, but into confusion first, and then straight into anger. She called it dramatic. She called it a stunt, a performance, a way of making the whole room look at me. She said I was throwing away a fortune just to make some kind of a point nobody had asked me to make, and she genuinely, truly, all the way down to the root of her, could not understand why any person alive would refuse to be given something, because in the whole long ledger of her life, value had only ever once flowed in a single direction, from the one who holds the ruler down to the one being measured by it. She was still holding that ruler even then, even now, white-knuckled. She simply no longer had anything of mine left in the world to lay it against. Across the table, Brooke was crying, openly now, one hand pressed hard over her own mouth, and when she finally lifted her wet eyes to me, I saw that she understood, fully, completely, maybe the very first person in that entire family ever to understand me all the way through to the bottom. And I could see plainly that it cost her something to understand it. It always does. I stood up. I had stood up from a table exactly like this one once before, 3 years earlier to the season, and walked out of the room because there was nothing there for me to sign. This time I stood and walked out because I had signed everything there was to sign, and there was nothing left anywhere in that room that I still wanted to take out of it. The same door, the opposite woman going through it. My father caught my sleeve as I passed his chair, his fingers weak on the fabric. His hand was shaking, the very way mine had shaken on the steering wheel in that parking lot all those years ago, and his old mouth worked, and no word ever quite came out of it. 40 years of practiced silence far too heavy to lift all at once at the very end of a life. He didn't get there. Some doors stay shut even when the man behind them has finally, far too late, decided he wants to open them and doesn't know how. But he reached for me, which he had never done, and I let him hold my sleeve for one long second, and then I gently took it back, and I walked out through the coffee smell into an ordinary October afternoon that did not care at all what had just happened. The land held. Hollow Creek is still standing out there, saved for good now, the near fields coming back slow the way fields do when someone finally lets them rest a season, protected past anything my mother or her opinions can ever reach again. She never did understand it, not to this day. She tells the town a version where the whole family came together and heroically saved the family farm, and I let her have it, because I don't need the record set straight anymore to sleep at night. My father wrote me a letter that winter, not long after. I have it. It's in the box now, with the old brown deeds. I haven't opened it, and I might never open it. And the strange and quiet thing is that I am all right either way, which is exactly how I know that something in me finally closed over clean and healed. I don't need the words inside that envelope to be okay anymore. That, right there, is the whole difference between the woman in the parking lot and the woman I am now. That is everything I went looking for in all their rooms and never once found. Brooke and I talk now. Not often, and it's careful. And there's a whole lifetime of ruler between us to work slowly around, but it's real, which is already more than the two of us ever once had under our mother's roof growing up. She's raising Nora out on the land I saved, and she has quietly started telling that little girl a different kind of story than the one the two of us grew up inside of. She told me last spring, on the phone, that she'd sat Nora down and explained, in small 4-year-old words the girl could hold, that there was an aunt who had once saved their whole entire world and never asked for a single thing back for it, not one thing. Nora is going to grow up on ground that cannot be sold out from under her feet, taught by a mother who is learning it late and against the grain of her whole raising, that what a person is worth is not a thing another person hands down to you across a table. The ruler stops with us, with our 2 girls. That is the part I would keep if I could only keep one part of the whole story. As for me, I drove the 50 minutes back to Burlington and back to my quiet work saving other people's dirt, and my business kept right on growing, and somewhere in that next year I stopped noticing whether anyone was watching me do it. That was the real tell, the one that finally told me the truth. I took my grandfather's letter out of the box one final time, that first autumn after, and read it all the way through once more, slow, out loud in the empty apartment. You'll know what to do, girl, because you're the only one who ever loved the dirt, not the deed. Then I folded it back up carefully along its soft, worn creases and set it down into the box with the old brown deeds and the hand-drawn map of the wet corners, and I closed the lid. And for the very first time in my whole entire life, closing something over did not feel anything at all like losing it. They spent my whole life deciding what I was worth. I finally stopped handing them the ruler. A bank notice on a door, a letter I never opened, a signature I refused to sign. If a family ever measured you by what you owned instead of everything you quietly carried, hear me now. You are not the disappointment. You are the one who kept it all standing. Subscribe, stay close, and I'll tell you another.